everybody. We're going to get started with this panel, which is called Podcast Programming, Personality and Interview, Crime and Drama, Investigative Journalism, Comedy and Politics. Somebody say it back to me.
That's a lot.
All right. We're going to be talking about a lot today, and you're in for a treat because my panel is down to get funky with me. Before we started, we were talking outside about ways to enter the room, and we considered doing one of those like jog up sports things where you give high fives to everybody. We decided against it. You should be happy about that. But we're going to have a lot of fun today, and I want to thank you guys so much for coming to this panel. On the stage with me are a lot of people who are working on amazing projects that touch on or are related to or are totally embedded within all of those adjectives and topics that I mentioned that are the topic of this panel. We're gonna learn about the panelists, their companies and their projects. We're gonna learn about Hollywood and IP, intellectual property, and we're gonna have a discussion about the larger podcast landscape and how it's uniquely situated here in Los Angeles, but then we're also going to juxtapose that with the East Coast podcasting landscape as well. And we're also going to leave some time for questions at the end. So strap in, let's learn a lot. If you've been to a panel that I've hosted before, you know that it's going to get a little weird. So just try to roll with it. And
wait, what about us though? What does that mean? It's going to get a little weird.
It means it's going to be weird for you too.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
okay.
Enjoy.
All right.
Even if you haven't been on my panel, you don't even know what's coming. We're going to keep you on your toes as well, so get ready to, we're going to do some audience feedback here and there. Jay is smiling, yep. So who am I? My name's Ariel Nissenblatt. This is a really long last name that means nut leaf in German, just so that you remember who I am. I'm the founder of Earbuds Podcast Collective, which is a weekly email with a theme and 5 podcast episodes on that theme. Each week is curated by a different person. I'm also the co-creator of Outlier Podcast Festival and currently the marketing and business development manager at Castbox, which is a podcast listening app. So those are all of my credentials why I am qualified to be on this stage. Now I'm going to tell you about these people and why they are super qualified to be on this stage. So first, I'm just going to read it in the order that I have here, but just raise your hand when I say your name. So Sim Sarna is the founder and CEO of Cloud10, which is an audio-focused digital media company. Then we have Jane over there. And she is the founder, she's a Peabody and Emmy award-winning journalist and the founder of Little Everywhere. And then there's Jonathan Hirsch. Yeah. And he's an award-winning producer and sound designer and the founder of Neon Hum Media. So what I could do next is read all their bios word for word, but I'm not going to do that.
Thank you.
So instead, I'm going to ask the panelists that in 30 seconds for you to describe your favorite things about what you do and try to hit the very important parts. Jonathan.
Okay. Well, I mean, my life as a producer has changed quite a bit in the last year and a half or so since I started my production company, Neon Hum, and I would say that up until that point, the thing that I spent the most time getting jazzed about was being inside a mix, rolling up my sleeves, thinking about how different transitions would work in a documentary or how I would score a segment of a reported feature or something like that. And I think I spent a lot of my time, which I think the 2 panelists here could probably also relate to, in spreadsheets and problem solving for my producers out there making shows. So it's a very different kind of jazzed, but I think I still like it.
That was 30 seconds. That's
Was
pretty
it?
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, still got it.
Yeah. Tight 30. Oh, me. Okay. What do I like? I like telling stories. I'm a storyteller, I think, at heart, even though I started out as a Pro Tools engineer. But those things in our world go hand in hand. If anyone is wondering what's the first thing to do to get into podcasting, learn Pro Tools. I love telling stories. I started out at This American Life and learned how to write radio there and continue enjoying that part of my life.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, so I started out as a movie producer, and my dream was to become a studio head, and now I get to do that in podcasting. I get to work with some of the most creative people in the world. I work with Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson on a show called Sibling Revelry. I work with Sophia Bush. I get to be in the room with them when we create the shows, and for me, I love being eavesdropping and just being part of the room, and I love being able to bring that to everyone else because you feel like you're part of that room as well. So that's my favorite thing about podcasting.
Awesome. Wow. Okay, we're going to be sticking to our time here. That was amazing. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what you all have in common, which is that your companies have all popped up uniquely, and they're uniquely situated in the Los Angeles podcast space. So I'm wondering first if you can talk about, we'll just go in the line, or whoever wants to pop their hand up, why you decided to start your company, and what's unique about it, and why is it in Los Angeles?
I can start. So I started my company with my business partner, Dan Gallucci. He was working at NPR on a show called Bullseye. I was at the time hosting the Tinder podcast DTR on Gimlet. And, okay, honest to God, this is a true story. So he had a recording space inside the Grand Royal building, which used to be owned by the Beastie Boys. And in that building, it also used to be occupied by Diplo and Mad Decent. And in that building is an indoor basketball court that suddenly started getting rented out for film shoots. And then also 3 of the spaces became inhabited by very beautiful young women rolling single joints for some companies around town. And so I would have guests, like I'd want to have a guest on the show and invite them to my recording studio, and then craft services would be in the way of the door, and then all these joints were everywhere, and I was like, we need a real recording space. And so wanting to build a real recording studio, a beautiful place that's comfortable for anyone to walk into, whether it's a politician or my child, that kind of motivated us to shop around for spaces. And then the space kind of, once we built that, we were like, oh, I guess we're a podcasting company now. Now other people want to be here, and we want to make shows with other people.
So, yeah.
And actually, you know what? Our new space was Mad Decent, was Diplo's space. So we're just following Diplo around Los Angeles. So wherever he is now downtown, we're going to take over that space next.
The rolling joints reference is definitely specific to Los Angeles.
Yes.
I was already here, so I created a show with Anna Faris called Anna Faris is Unqualified. This is close to, it's 4.5 years ago. And I guess she was one of the few celebrities to actually, Alec Baldwin had a podcast. There were a few other notable actors that had podcasts. And the show, you know, it was different because it was the first look into, she really got personal with her life and her marriage, and it really gave us a glimpse of what celebrities are really like in a long form kind of atmosphere, the way Howard Stern has done it for so long on Sirius Radio. And it worked. It really worked, and that ushered in, I guess, an era of celebrities such as Dax and now Conan, and I guess I'm bringing in more people. I'm contributing to this mess, but it's LA. Is there like a East Coast West Coast kind of rivalry?
Yeah.
We should start one.
You think we should, right?
Yeah.
Because Gimlet is over on the East Coast. They started there. They kind of positioned
Right.
themselves in Brooklyn, and then.
Yeah.
But I feel like you are the guy to make
Me.
you personally, because
Okay.
you guys haven't heard any of Jonathan's shows. They're phenomenal. I'm a huge fan, but I think like,
Nice of you.
you for sure. I mean, we should plant some kind of
Okay.
flag here.
Yeah,
Don't you
yeah.
think?
We'll work on it. I'm gonna have to get a little bit more competitive, but like we'll work on it. Yeah. There
said
you
that?
go. Okay, good. All right, we'll
That
get
guy.
it started. Yeah,
I
there we
did
are.
ask for commentary from the crowd, so
Good.
I invited that.
Okay, we're gonna need your help on this one. Should I? I mean, for me, it still feels accidental that, I mean, what Neon Hum has become is not accidental by any means. That would be silly of me to say, but I do feel that the genesis of the company was accidental. I mean, I was a producer. I was working on a lot of different shows. I had just released a documentary about my own life, an audio documentary called Dear Franklin Jones. And I started to think about what I was going to do next. I was about to have a son. And also maybe I'm a little bit late stage compared to the work that you guys were already like heavy in and sort of thinking about the creating structures to produce work in. Because when I started thinking about making a production company, it was also because I was experiencing pressures from outside, from the industry, from people coming in and saying like, could you make this show could you staff up shows? That was the weirdest thing, being an independent producer and starting to see, coming from a public radio background, people wanting to make shows and not really having the resources to do it, and there being so few resources there that the ask to somebody like me was like, can you find some producers and like make a thing? And after a while I was like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense as one person for a variety of reasons to do. I should probably incorporate, start a company and see how this goes. And sort of the first big project that arrived around the time I made that decision. The deadline for the trailer release for the show was the due date for my son.
You're making me so resentful right now. I'm
What's
just
that?
like, I'm feeling so resentful because I mean, thinking about like my kid coming was like the time when my career went, you know, because it had to come out of my body.
Right.
But go ahead, you go on.
Sorry.
tell me about that time was just a prime time to start a company.
Yeah, let's not suggest that my career went up after that. I don't know about that. But I knew I couldn't produce the show on my own, so I had to get some help to do it if I was going to do it, and that was sort of the moment. The first show that we did, Remade in America, I called up a producer I had been working with and was like, hey, let's do this show and maybe it'll become a company thing possibly, but the release date I'm not going to be there for. I don't think my wife would like that. So for me it felt accidental, but at the same time, I think, like all of us, we were sensitive to the way that the industry was changing. I mean, at least I know, you know, Jane, like you and I came from public media, where we learned a lot of these like production skills, but did not have the expectation that the industry and all these different sort of intersections would happen so quickly. And I just think that, you know,
and that there was any money in it.
What's that?
And that there was any money in it.
Oh,
and
my
people
gosh,
are still,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like our world is still adjusting to the idea of making a profit.
Can we talk about that?
Yes.
I mean,
there's no built-in profit in
who's been here all day? 'Cause I've been listening to many of the sessions, and are you all encouraged, or are you scared about monetization for your podcast? Because I know a bunch of you have your own podcast right now. How are you feeling? Okay, so we'll do that. We can do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
Don't start in your living room. I'm just kidding.
Start in Jane's studio.
Record in a studio.
So let me ask that question to you guys.
Yeah.
How do you monetize?
Jesus.
Okay, so the type of shows that I do are monetized differently than the type of shows that you do sometimes.
Right.
So, of course, the shows that I work with celebrities mostly, so the sponsors are always looking for endorsements, so host-read ads. If a celebrity is not willing to do the ad, then I'm probably not going to take on that show, because then those CPMs are just driven to the, they're just going to plummet. These shows are not cheap, especially there's a lot of work that go into, I mean, you guys know how much preparation, I mean, there are full staffs on all of these shows, so these shows need to turn a profit, and we were just talking earlier, some of my shows do very, very, very well, and that's the only way I can sustain this company, because I also have shows that don't do very well, that also have notable people in them, but they may break even, or I may lose money because I'm putting a bunch of staff on there, so I'm losing money on just other resources. So it's really hard to get to that point.
Yeah.
The download number, I know that Corey was talking about 10,000 it's different it really depends on, okay, I'll break it down. Most of my shows are direct response shows. So I will work with ad results and Veritone One and Performance Bridge Oxford. I think they've merged, and they pretty much make all the decisions for all of the ads that are you hear right now. Ad results represents about 70%, I believe, of all of the ads, like Peloton and ZipRecruiter and MeUndies and Ritual Vitamins. So there are, let's say, 750,000, maybe 300,000 active shows. Most of them are in the talk space, but very, very, very few of them are going to be allotted the ad dollars given that quarter for that show. Mm-hmm. We're talking about just the top people,
right.
Conan O'Brien, Dak Shepard, some of my shows. Just in that talk space.
Yeah.
And then who knows what's left over for Q1. I mean, it's not encouraging. It's not.
No.
And I think, like, as a business owner, we have and a talent, there's like two sides to this, right? So you have a podcast company, we take on branded content, we take on especially in Hollywood, like subsidiary marketing podcasts to television and movies. So a movie's coming out and someone in the marketing department says, hey, we should do a behind the scenes podcast about this, or let's talk to the talent or whatever. So there'll be like some marketing budget there, and that can fund your passion project. But that's if you're a company. As a creator, I gotta just be honest with you, you just have to make a really fucking good podcast that no one can deny is amazing and everyone wants to listen to.
Let me,
sorry.
It's true, no, please curse, I love it.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt and say, okay, so I think there are a few independent producers here, and what is the actual process from creating? Are people going to reach out to you to advertise? How do independent creators go about potentially being sponsored?
They're going to reach out to you if they want to sponsor your show. Again, there's really two people making these decisions. They represent most of these shows, and they work through performance. So even if a show, if one of my shows, let's say, has 300 or 250,000 downloads, and I sold that at a $35 CPM, so I got a per spot rate of around, I don't know, $8,000. I haven't done the math in my head, but around $8,000. If that doesn't work, if every single sponsor has their own version, their own conversion metrics. So ZipRecruiter has their own. I know if they don't see some type of return on their investment, whether it's monetary or whether it's clicks to their landing page, then they're not going to re-up. They're just not. And then even if I have a show that's doing very well, is charting very high, has a ton of downloads, if I have empty inventory and no slots to fill, then that's just, I might as well, then I still have a staff working. I'm still paying for that show. And I'm not going to keep that show around.
And then weeklies and seasonal are different as well.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
Seasonal shows are so hard,
It might be helpful to do a little bit of a definition of terms here about like the kind of companies like Jane Marie and myself, like our companies are primarily, I don't want to speak for you, but primarily work for hire companies. And to us, and at least from my point of view or my definition of that, is most of the work that we get, even the really fun stuff that we get to work on, that's like the blockbuster, documentary series and fiction shows and stuff. Those are work for hire. So our team, our staff, our expert, wonderful producers who are like just spending all their time thinking about story, they have the good fortune of making these really cool projects that are well financed and are supported by the, like the larger outfits, the larger media
networks, television outlets.
Yeah. So that's
big brands.
But and their capacity to maybe exploit those shows into down the road like film or TV projects is much better than, say, I don't know, being an independent producer, which I've been through. We've all made stuff and put it out there in the world. Like it's a totally different point of view on making stuff just because of the clients that we get in the door.
If I were on my own, I would definitely hire marketing folks.
Yeah.
I'd raise some money. I would use that Patreon money not to pay myself, but to pay someone to let people know that my show's out there. And there are a lot of great independent podcast marketing firms and individuals that can do a really good job for $5,000 or something.
Right.
But there are some basic things that we can talk about.
What's
Shark
that?
Party Media.
Who? Gray Horse.
Shark Party, yeah.
Gray Horse.
But if you can't afford one of these marketing people, there are things that you can do on your own. If you have a marketing budget, you could buy spots and feed drops on other podcasts that you feel are similar. That to me, that works really well for me. Mid-roll ads are good, but feed drops on other podcasts you're invited to their house. When you open your podcast, and sometimes you'll see, like Wondery does this a lot, you'll see introducing another podcast. That's a feed drop that was just inserted, almost like an email. So you click on that, and then usually there's a link.
You can sometimes buy those.
You can buy those. They're harder to buy, but those work like a charm. Sorry?
Between independent podcasts, it's more likely for an indie podcaster to reach out to another indie podcaster and say, let's do a swap or let's do a drop swap.
Or if you have money, just buy it.
Exactly. The conversion rate there, I think, is like 60% or something. Like, so if if someone subscribed to one feed and your show shows up in their feed, about a little more than half of the people listening will go subscribe to your show. So that's.
But I'll also add that two things. First is, in order for any of this to work, what do you need to create?
A really good podcast.
It's got to be really good. And another thing is that when you're creating a really great podcast on your own, what you can do is reach out to potential advertisers on your own. You never know what's going to happen. I recently, for a podcast that I produce, recorded a fake Blue Apron ad, sent it to Blue Apron, and was like, this is something that I would like to do for you. And you never know. Put it out there. They might think you're bold and spunky enough. And they did. I'm an affiliate now. So you can just try a bunch of different things. Like a lot of the podcast panels before us were saying, the podcast industry is still not very regulated. So there aren't like these roadblocks that you need to pass in order to.
I'll say a podcast that's become very popular, Forever 35. Dori Shafrir, one of the hosts, started out just doing the ad sales herself. I mean, she was like thinking of companies that she thought her listenership would want to, purchase their products, calling them directly and saying like, here's how much an ad is, and that's how they funded it for the first year.
Yeah, and also think about, we'll take questions in a bit. Think about companies that you love, something maybe that you use pretty often, and say like, I endorse this product, do you want me to endorse this to my already existing audience? You never know. So I just want to jump to a different topic. So I think it would be fun if we all think about one word that describes your current feeling about the podcast industry, but I think you're going to agree with me here, avoid the word intimate. Intimate is a buzzword that's overused.
Shit show? Is that? No,
I think it's confusing.
That's so confusing.
I was going to say nascent. I feel like whatever it is that I feel like a year and a half from now we're gonna look back at this moment and it's gonna look very different.
Yeah.
And not to be fatalistic about this, but let's be real here. Like, media will consolidate.
Yes.
It's happening, and so for us to assume that things will stay the way that they are is ridiculous.
Right.
Like it will continue to consolidate, and that means to some extent that the kingdom, as it were, will wall off a little bit. And we should be realistic about that. That also means that the way that ads are sold, the way that we distribute shows, who gets to distribute them and when and at what scale, will start to become more formalized, I guess is probably, I can't think of a better word to describe it.
When I'm feeling positive about the world, I'm thinking, I like to compare it to blogging, right? So blogs came about, and then everybody's dad had a fishing blog, and your mom had a blog about something, and then people started blogging like in groups, and then there was Gawker, and they were like, what's this? And then everybody wanted to be a blog, and now blogs are newspapers, and hopefully podcasts can continue on that route. I want to say we're at the Gawker moment right now, and it could go any which direction. Yeah.
So let's hold on, Zach, just a sec. Actually, yeah, go ahead. Why not?
Yeah. Just respond.
I'll repeat.
To your point, I actually think blogs were eaten by Twitter and Facebook.
Blogs were eaten by Twitter and Facebook.
Specifically Twitter, and so I'm worried about Twitter podcasting.
Is that Zach Davis?
Yeah.
Oh, hey. Hi, Zach.
I mean, they were kind of eaten, but they were also every major media outlet and magazine and newspaper, any print decided to become blogs. Like the New York Times is a blog now. No? All right.
I think, well, I mean, to your point, right? Like in our best moments, we see it that way. But then from another perspective, some of the most successful emergent blogs were bought out and ingested by larger companies.
Right.
So whatever that space they occupied before has now been scooped into the larger system. And we can't know what the absence of those things affected market-wise. But I like the positive part.
So let's just turn to the crowd for a little bit. Raise your hand if you listen to one podcast a week. Raise your hand. I don't know if I should go lower or higher. Raise your hand if you listen to 5 podcasts a week. More?
Wow.
Nice.
10? 20? Jeremy.
20.
All
Wow.
right, you're the winner.
That's amazing.
Yay. Come see me for a prize after. I didn't tell you I was offering prizes. So, okay, moving on to our next thing. I want to talk about intellectual property, especially in Los Angeles and in the Hollywood space. I went to a podcast event last Friday where somebody was talking about how a lot of the podcast content that they see created is created not for the sake of audio, but for the sake of eventually being bought and then turned into a TV or a movie. So I want to get your take on that. I see your making a face, Jane. So if you could explain that face, that'd be great.
My face is like, when somebody calls me with that idea, I'm just like, actually the thing that you're talking about is the testing ground is my baby. Like, that's my end product. That is my that's my art at the end. And you're talking about it as like we'll see if my art works by, paying for your cheap art first. That's all I have to say about IP and podcasting.
Audio for the sake of audio.
Not that I don't profit from that.
But it's okay if it's not, Sim.
First of all, when it comes to IP, the shows that I do, mostly the talk space, it depends on who I work with. It depends on the leverage that I have, really. The bigger you are, I probably don't have any of the IP. And all that stuff can be negotiated. But some of the stuff that you guys are doing and some of the audio dramas, the creator should own all of the IP, because then that's their bargaining chip. If it does win the lottery and turns into some other type of TV show or a movie or gets to that. I'm also getting, like everyone else, I'm also getting into the audio drama space, attaching actors and putting. I'm not as bullish on it as everyone else, just because I've been following the space for about 5 years and I've just seen the economics and how much they actually cost versus how much you can bring in the ad space. And then once people like Audible stop buying full packages, because they're spending a lot right now, and they will, but once they stop, then where are we going to get the ad dollars from? These things cost a lot of money, and if the gamble is going to turn into a TV show or a movie, well, I know how much these things cost just on the audio side. It's not a gamble that I'm willing to take.
Yeah, and I mean, unless there was some sort of, again, like consolidation of the way that the pipeline from a podcast to a film or TV product actually worked. I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of that stuff's going to happen in-house at Consolidated Media Groups, and then we don't even see that until it's a movie or a podcast.
I also think with the derivative works, a lot of times that is, again, it's like it's built into how somebody's going to make money with your podcast. So they're thinking about that before they're thinking about what the product is that you're actually putting out there. And you were talking about scripted for a second. I'll make those, but I just feel like we solved that with TV.
What's that?
We solved radio plays with TV. So now we're like working backwards.
No. I mean, there is an audio. There's something to have an actual audio experience. If it's done, I mean, the old school British radio. That's
what I'm saying. That's what then they made TV, and now we're going back. So it's like, if I don't know how to. You don't think that there's a place for just? I mean, I love the idea of just having things that stand alone for audio, shows that work for audio that don't necessarily have an eye towards adaptation. But I want to do that if I can figure out a way to make money from it. Right. And it seems like the way to make money is to then think about the TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
The more ambitious ones, at least ambitious in terms of like where they're going to land later, those do oftentimes, and I mean we're guilty of this too, like sometimes sound like they're just television shows that are ripped into audio. You look up and you're actually watching a movie. But then there are fiction works like James Kim's Moonface, where music supplants cinematography. There's like such art and care placed in it that it just feels like the same sort of things that got a lot of us public radio producers, documentary producers, passionate about audio is present in works like that. And that doesn't really necessarily articulate the landscape of like podcasts as IP. That's like a whole nother thing unto itself that's not looking for that. But I mean, on the bright side, I would offer one sort of alternative to that, because I've been in that position where like my own work was being negotiated for a film and TV project, negotiated in the sense that we were literally picking and choosing which parts of it would be valuable for a totally different context, and it was a headache. But also I do think that like part of our medium being as spare comparatively is that it is malleable. So you can create a standalone work, and if the approach, and I've seen this approach among some folks who are trying to adapt works from audio into film and TV, if the approach is, I want to create something that is inspired by your work and builds upon that universe in a different way, then I think it can add value, as long as it's not just there for to be picked apart. As long as there's an authentic and like honest interest in the work.
I'm just finding the people that have the money to make it are all thinking about that
I
secondary product
completely
right now.
understand.
Absolutely agree.
What's the derivative potential here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be explored in audio for the sake of audio. And I think going forward, there will be many more listeners coming up that will want audio just for the sake of audio. And we're also going to have to try some innovative things within that. So I'm thinking about, there was an app called Detour, I think it closed, but it was a geolocated walking tour that was specific to the city that you were in. So things like that I think are going to keep popping up, and that's audio or learning through audio for the sake of that. But I want to move on. We don't have that much time left, and we haven't gotten to diversity yet. Do you have a question?
Does anybody's podcast have like audiences where they get to the point where people actually want to buy tickets to watch?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Let me repeat
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I mean,
let me repeat the
their
question.
podcasters are rock stars now.
Sam,
Seriously.
Let me just repeat the question. This gentleman asked if there are, you got really excited, if there are podcasters that have audiences that are so popular that people want to buy tickets to see them.
The answer is yes. Have you heard of My Favorite Murder?
Huge.
Yes. So Karen in Georgia, they sell out 3,000 seats. They 40, 50 dates a year. It's amazing.
Crooked
Even
Media.
there's Sex Talk with My Mom over here. They do some live shows, they sell some tickets, and they talk about sex, mom and son. Lots of people are doing lots of things. So let me move on to our diversity question. I asked this question in a forum a little bit earlier today of a panel. Podcasting is still kind of in its infancy. We haven't completely had to have situations where we don't really have to have a Me Too movement yet in podcasting, and hopefully we won't. But, you know, every once in a while there are instances of racism, sexism, lack of diversity in boards or in podcasts themselves. So I'm wondering what your companies are doing or what you are thinking about as individuals to combat that possibility and to make sure that it doesn't happen. Lack of diversity.
I mean, honestly, I'm like terrified to work with any straight white guys half the time, and I'm sorry, but like you go into meetings and you're just like, please don't be one of these guys, you know, and it kind of steers you away from that, which is like a nice thing for right now because it keeps us diverse.
I have one straight white guy on my staff, and he's a really good editor, though, so I want to keep him.
So he has a use.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Sorry? I mean, what I meant to say is mostly women who work for me. That's what I really meant to say. So as far as, does that count as diversity?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Diversity thing, like we are a diverse species on planet Earth. Shouldn't you want to cater to the creative product versus curating your team based on perceptual differences?
I think it's super important for here, I'll give an example. There was a company, and I'll just say it because they've been public about it. There's a company called Squadcast. They do remote recording. They're a software for remote recording. And they recently made an announcement that their advisory board, it was all 5 white men. I do not think that that's an accurate representation of the podcasting landscape right now. And therefore, people pushed back and said, there needs to be some diversity here. There need to be different voices here. I'm not saying you pick diversity for the sake of picking diversity, but you do pick diversity for the sake of getting different voices and learning different things so that you can serve everybody.
That's market research, that's not a creative process. That's demographics. It's like saying In-N-Out should have a chicken sandwich.
What? I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
It's like saying In-N-Out burger should have a chicken sandwich. I mean, demographics and market research are completely different from creative deception.
So say podcasting is 50-50 men and women, right? I think the board should look like that. I don't know.
I think the stories we tell necessitate
I was
a
gonna
variety
say,
of voices.
yeah.
There's no show that I can think of that doesn't need a variety of voices. That we're working on anyway, but
Yeah.
mostly what we do is documentary work, so we have to look to the world for our stories. I don't have everybody's experience, for example, and if we're telling a variety of stories about like the American experience, then we need to have a variety of voices in the room, and we can't do it otherwise.
Yeah. And in terms of the teams that you develop, like as a small business, like we have to develop teams that can respond to every kind of show. In large part, also because we are at least for our case, we are work for hire. So whatever comes in the door is what we have to make the best version of. So the more diverse our teams are, the more responsive we'll be to the stories that come through that people are like, hey, can you make this?
I'll also say that when I got started in audio storytelling 20 years ago, it was at public radio. I was the least educated, the least wealthy. I had to take a paid internship because I couldn't apply for any unpaid internships. And I was like an oddball in the room. And I knew then that if I ever was the person in charge, I wanted more people like me in the room, like people who didn't have 2 years of unpaid internships somehow paid for in their lives, because we would not be speaking the same language. Like I couldn't relate to a lot of my coworkers who got into public radio because someone else paid for them to be able to be there.
So diversity of everything, not just
Right.
not just race and gender, but also
Point of view.
Class and point of view, yeah, all
view
that stuff.
everything. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. It goes with the diversity as far as podcasts are concerned. I have a podcast, and I feel like it's a movement more than just a topic. Can you cite any podcast that would be of this essence instead of just a topic, and how these movement-based podcasts per se would monetize? I mean, I guess just like any podcast it could, but it's a little bit different when you start getting people on board like with a lifestyle than just talking about, I don't know, classic cars or something.
Okay, let me repeat the question and let me know if I have it. So for podcasts that are not just topic-based, but are kind of inciting movements, is that the idea? Or espousing movements? Okay. How can you monetize? So can you give an example? What is the movement?
My podcast is called Vegan Voices.
So veganism and celibacy. Okay. So how do you monetize as a celibate vegan?
Well, I mean,
Called impossible.
I think it's so niche that you reach out to potential advertisers that are interested in promoting those things.
people are laughing, but we actually have a lot of people that have felt marginalized throughout the years and who are giving us thank yous. Like they've been pressured, or there's a lot of asexuals or asexual vegans, people coming from spiritual or non-spiritual. So
Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at, I think, and we can talk about this later, podcasting is a place where you do have a platform for that, and when you reach people, that's amazing. When it comes to monetization, I think you do need to reach out to potential advertisers who are interested in who are buying what you're selling, you know? I don't know that there is a precedent.
It's tough for anything though. I mean, my podcast, my most successful podcast that I host is anti-industry. Like it's at its core, it is anti-companies that are, and it's really hard.
It's a great one, by the way.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Oh, it's called The Dream, and the first season was about multi-level marketing, and the second season will be about wellness. And I can't, it's so hard to find somebody that wants to spend money on my show. They're doing it, but it's really, really hard because we are taking a critical look at American industry. Like, who else is there to advertise on my show but these industries that, I don't know, are they legit? Is everybody cool here? It's hard. So I think, it's a hustle, man.
So I want to get to one more question, and then we'll open it up for the last few minutes. If you could share a project of yours that you did not think was going to be as successful as it was, you found unexpected, huge success through it, can you explain that process and why you didn't think it was going to be as big and what the surprise was? And it can be a show, it can be an episode, it can be an advertising campaign, anything.
My joke answer is like, no. I think every podcast I make is going to be a hit. No, I would say the Tinder show. Because it's a branded show with Gimlet. We had our sights set here, and then because we made sure it didn't sound like a commercial and that there were good stories in it, it outperformed our expectations, and that was really wonderful.
So the factor there was good stories.
Great stories,
Great stories,
great
Quality
characters, good. We had a lot of burn in that show, a lot of kill. We built in, I think it was like 50% of what we gathered for that show didn't air. And so we put the best stuff on, and it didn't sound like a commercial. And so more people listened than we were expecting.
I have a similar answer. It's for the last one I just did, Sibling Revelry. I expected it to be, I expected it to do well. I didn't expect it to do this well. So
And why do you think?
I just thought because we already had personalities that were well known, but people really responded to the actual show, which just goes back to make a great show. So, and people are telling people about it because everything is word of mouth, in my opinion, with podcasting.
I mean, I would say that probably the show that I produced shortly before starting this company, Dear Franklin Jones, which was a documentary I think I mentioned earlier, and I did not expect it to perform as well as it did. And I think a large part of what I didn't expect was that people were going to want to listen to me tell very intimate details about my life, and to be very personal about it. My dad is featured on the show, and at one point towards the end of making it, he was like, "I don't know, son, I just don't think people are going to find this interesting." And I'm like, "You have no idea." So I was confident that listeners would find my family stories interesting. I didn't think that they would care a lick about what I had to say. And I will say that across the board, having produced, at least, we've probably produced about 40 shows at this point. In each instance where one of our shows has come out, especially in the documentary, like the long form work, my expectations have been exceeded when the stories are personal. Sometimes I'm so focused on like the context or the narrative arc or the reporting that I forget that like one of the reasons we all come to this medium is that it's one person speaking to one other person 1 million, 10 million times over, and that the personal nature of that, I'm not going to use the I word.
I was waiting for it, by the way.
We'll start a rivalry over that word just alone. But the personal nature of it tends to draw people in a way that no other.
I mean, Serial did it. That's what kicked it all off, right?
Yeah.
Like Sarah had been working on this thing for 10 years.
Yeah, and the moral dilemma.
Yeah.
Like I still feel the feeling I had at the end of that show. I mean, I'm sure we all do.
We're seeing our light.
There's
All
numbers.
right, we just have 3 minutes left, so let's take some questions if there are. Yes.
Under the heading of boring part of the business, lawyers who really take the fun out of the thing. Two-part question. First, I have celebrities that come on to a new set of shows that we produce. Do you have all of your guests sign releases?
So when there are guests on shows, do you have guests who sign releases?
Yeah, we have a standard form.
Yep.
Standard form.
I'd say in my field reporting, 99% of the time, but if it's not a signed release, I'll do it verbally on tape. So if there's something happens, because in documentary work.
What do you do when agents and managers want you to indemnify them against anything that might happen from the podcast?
I call my attorney.
Agents and
That-
managers
I-
want you to
that's-
indemnify them against anything that might happen as a result of the podcast.
I mean, I have a really robust insurance policy that covers.
That hasn't
Our
been part of
company.
any of my agreements at all so far.
Okay. I want to talk about your insurance.
Yeah, no problem.
Other questions?
What effect, if any, does the entertainment unions have on podcasts?
Sorry, say it again.
Like SAG-AFTRA, is it difficult to deal with them, or have they?
Has it been difficult to work with SAG-AFTRA?
You know what? We're not unionized, so it's the weirdest thing. Like, sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes it's not. Podcasting isn't considered writing for some reason, so we're not in a guild, and so then it's a lot of.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can't work with you because you're not part of a guild, and sometimes they can, and sometimes it makes things very, very expensive.
And also that answer is probably going to change in
Yep.
a year and a half,
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
So.
I have 2 questions. I have the not so sexy podcast with Milano. It's on the front page of the Apple Podcast, but I don't know if I can send it all out. I've been waiting to hear it. My question is, I just started trying to monetize it. I'm only charging $300 for the local companies for a shout out. So I don't know at all what to do next, how to charge. I now have to figure it out. But also, super quick question. What exactly is a feed drive?
What's a feed drive?
Well, it could be. You're pretty much buying your like a place like a pod. It's almost like as if you're putting your podcast or a snippet or a trailer on some other podcast feed.
You've done a feed drop. Good job. And the first part of your question, we can talk after. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm sorry, if you'll remember, but one of you said that two people make decisions on ads.
Well, there's two companies in the direct response performance space that represent, I'd say, 75 to 85% of all of the ads that you hear that ask for, give you a promo code or a vanity URL. Two ad companies,
Two
yeah.
ad companies make decisions on a lot of the ads.
Ad results is the biggest one.
We probably have time for one more question if there are any. Cam. So how important is
I'm so bad at doing that. Like, I'm really bad. Yeah.
So how important is it to have other social media in order to promote your podcast, and also creating audiograms and other things like that?
I do it for all of them. Yeah. For us, it works. I mean, it seems to work. Yeah. It's so hard to tell, though.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
like you got
Yeah,
three folks up here who wouldn't be able to tell you, yes, if you put X amount of dollars. But back to the point about marketing earlier, the one thing I will say about that is, I don't know if you guys have perceived this change over the last several years, but it's important to note that, I mean, when I was in public media and I was seeing like marketing budgets versus production budgets, they were often things like 5 to 1. So you'd spend let's see, for every $100,000 you spend on production, you spend $20,000 on marketing.
Right.
And now those budgets are like 1 to 1, very frequently 1 to 1. So marketing investments that companies are making in shows are equivalent to the production investments. Now, I think productions hurt sometimes because of those decisions, but it just goes to show how much the industry, the sort of sands are shifting under our feet right now.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up. Thank you guys so much for having
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, y'all.